Because sometimes you might get an asset where you are the hotel, you are maybe the place to drink and eat in that marketplace without having to do much to do it. But if you go into a market where the competition, and I know we're, in South Florida, it's up and coming, and the competition is starting to get real. Well, then you got to think about what cards you're going to play. Now, again, if you have culinary chops inside of your organization and restaurateur chops inside of your organization, you follow the same methodology of any great restaurateur. You start with the concept. You work with a badass branding agency. You create an entire brand package. You invest in the marketing. You invest in the social media. You invest in the communications, and you build the brand whilst at the same time you're executing the product.
I really like to get into a life story. I really like to learn about you. I like to learn about how you got into the industry. Why did you get into hospitality? Why did you get into food and beverage? What drew you to this business?
Well, listen, I got into the business when I was 16 years old. I started, at a restaurant in Glastonbury, Connecticut, where I grew up. And I'd grown up with my family traveling quite extensively. My parents always believed in travel and always enriched us with great dining experiences in New York and Europe. And it was only natural that my first job in high school was in a restaurant. And so I got a job as a barback. Wasn't even sure what that was at the time when I was 16 years old, but I took the job no matter what. And I remember my first day was the opening of the restaurant, and it was the grand opening party for all friends and family of the ownership. Very successful restaurant group in Connecticut called Max Restaurant Group. And I remember being behind the bar and feeling the energy from the people and just watching the smiles on their faces and me having an active part, although I was just, topping up wine and, freshening up ice bins, having an active part in their experience for the evening. And it resonated with me. And I remember I came home, I think it was like 2:00 in the morning, and I came home and my parents stayed up. Of course, I was 16 years old. I just got in a car and they said, "How was it?" And I was like, I can't wait to go back tomorrow. And, what was supposed to be just a weekend part-time job turned into a full-time job all through high school. That took me all through high school until the time came to decide on regular college, if you will, in which I was kind of forced the hand into going to a regular college. I wanted to attend the Culinary Institute of America. It was somewhat looked down upon as a technical school from the high school that I came from. And so I was guided and directed into going to the University of North Carolina. That was a very short-lived experience. I was 6 months on the ground before I packed up my car and made the adult decision to turn around and go back home, and showed up on my parents' doorstep and said, "I'm going to go to the Culinary Institute of America." And that's kind of where it all started.
What brought you to that decision? What was missing?
Passion for the business, passion for what I wanted to do. I really love the restaurant business. From 16 until I graduated high school, I was a full-time employee in that restaurant. I learned under a gentleman by the name of Mark Conley, who took me under his wing. He came from the New York restaurant scene. He brought me through every single position in the restaurant. And when I came back home from North Carolina, he put me on the floor and started training me as an assistant manager at 18 years old. And so I was opening lunch shifts and closing down the restaurant at 18, 300 seat, probably $7 million restaurant at 18 years old. And, it was just that attraction to the industry, the attraction to the pace, being surrounded by food, and honestly, just the art of hospitality, which I don't know if I could find anywhere else or any other industry.
How did you get the other people in the restaurant, the cooks, the waiters, the waitresses, to respect an 18-year-old and to follow you?
I think that it started off with work ethic to begin with. I prided myself on that my whole career. work is priority number one and you give it everything you have to be successful. And if it's, you put yourself in an environment where you don't know what exactly it is you're doing, you learn, and you have to learn quick. It's a fast-paced industry and you need to get involved, right? You have to take care and intent with the people that you're working with and their roles especially in a restaurant environment. What is that chef doing? Why are they doing that? And what's going to be the end result? It's really important to know that, because you have to make sure that you're aligned with everyone in a restaurant. I always like to reference a great restaurant experience as a beautiful ballet. If it all does not work together in sync and one person's out of step, it has a knock-on effect that ultimately will affect the guest experience and damage the brand.
Why do most restaurants fail?
I think that's, to be honest, a loaded question. I think that there's a lot of reasons. I would say that the top ones are, you have a lot of people that get into the restaurant business without having been in the restaurant business long enough to understand what it takes to make it work. It's a very, very hard business. People always say it. I think people look at it and say it flippantly because they don't know, but it is. It's a really hard business. And you can only be successful if you embrace the fact that it's going to be really hard and you have to be up for the challenge. And I don't think a lot of people really understand that. And I think that that's probably the biggest failure. I would say the second is, a lot of people get into the business that maybe only come from one side of the business, the culinary for the most part. They don't have the business acumen to understand what happens in the front to make all of it work in sync with each other. And I think there was a long period of time, and I think we're maybe getting out of that as people are starting to understand more about the industry, as the industry is becoming more dominant and more well-respected. I think for a long time, people have looked at the restaurant space very chefy, very culinary focused. That's also, as much as it's a great part of the business and something that we need to have and respect as a passion, your passion cannot necessarily drive all aspects of the business to success and greatness. You have to have the business acumen. And I think that that's where the second failure is probably.
Do any examples come to mind of this kind of chefy driven business and missing the mark on the business acumen that really embody what you just described?
Gosh, I don't want to name names because I don't want to put anybody out there.
Don't name names, just give me the story.
Yeah, listen, there was not that long ago, there was a French restaurant that opened up in Los Angeles. Incredibly well-respected talent, incredibly well-respected brand. And the food quality was exceptional. The restaurant was exceptionally busy. And 9 months later, it closed because they signed a really bad lease deal. And they got into bed with a fixed agreement that was unattainable for them to be able to meet their financial requirements in a very financially, cost impacted business and market in Los Angeles. And so that right there, it looks so good. It's going to be great. It feels like it's going to be the perfect deal. And we're going to be so busy. No matter how busy you are, somewhere in that methodology, they were missing the mark. Weren't really planning out accordingly what the financial cost would be to run a business like that, what their income would be, what their check average was going to be, the amount of covers that they had. And at the end of the day, they couldn't cover their expenses. And all of that money and all of their investors' money was lost, it was sad because it was personally one of my favorite restaurants and it just never made it.
I think there's a big disconnect with landlords today. Like, you have a lot of landlords that want to kind of placemake, and everyone talks about placemaking. But in my opinion, in order to placemake, you have to somewhat subsidize, I think, restaurants to come in, because they create the life, they create the energy, and then you could fill in with maybe other national tenants or retailers around that restaurant. Is that a big part of the problem for restaurants outside of hotels, this whole landlord tenant dynamic, finding a location, is it the right spot? Do we have the right lease? Is that where you've seen a lot of things go wrong?
100%. And I think to that point, and it's a great point because a lot of the market is now starting to shift, Jake. What we are seeing in the industry, whether it's in the hotel space and or in new developments, you're starting to see that landlords are just doing percentage rent. They're giving a significant amount of TI, if not 100%, 60 to 70% TI. And what that's allowing restaurateurs to do is go in and do what they do best. Be able to truly focus on the art of hospitality, on providing great cuisine, strong programming, using the resources that they have internally for marketing, promotion, social media to make the business work. When you are so focused on making sure that you're taking all of that money towards covering your financial investment into the business, so focused on making sure that you're covering payroll and your rent at the end of the month, it doesn't leave a lot of extra dollars and cents to be able to do the things that you need to activate your business. Restaurants are one of these environments where they need to be kept top of mind for the guest. You have to be out there. You have to have a good social media strategy. You have to have good marketing campaigns. You have to do promotions and activations. You have to do partnerships, chef's dinners. You have to always continue to feed it and activate against it to keep your guests engaged because it is a very competitive market. And when you have them, you want to continue to embrace them. You want to continue to bring them in and you want to make sure that they're coming back again the next day. That pressure, if a landlord works with an owner, that pressure is now off of that business model. Ultimately, both will win because now their asset has a really strong performing, highly regarded business, a place that brings customers and guests to their hotel or their retail and residential development. In some cases, it's making it very interesting and attractive for people to rent tenancies in that building, to purchase potentially condos in that building and to stay in that hotel. I mean, I think, and you go and looking at the world of hotels, which obviously you're very active in, and I have been for the last 2 decades of my career, the restaurant may be the only single differentiator that brand has inside of that community in that marketplace. Otherwise you're really just competing against rate and maybe a good spa, fitness activities. But the food and beverage has a real opportunity to differentiate your hotel and your brand out of the sea of sameness in that marketplace where that brand sits.
We just bought a hotel called the White Barn Inn, and what you're talking about is really hard to quantify because, some investors were concerned. They're like, well, we don't want to invest in a restaurant. We want to invest in a hotel. And we're like, yeah, well, the restaurant does a lot of revenue and it's profitable. It's not as profitable as the hotel, but the real revenue comes from the hotel. But I would argue actually that if the restaurant wasn't there, I don't know that that hotel could achieve the rate premium and do the volume and the occupancy that it does. And it's very, very integral, but it just kind of happened naturally over 30 years of being there. It's not something that, we created or someone else created 5 years ago. I want you to talk more about how kind of the restaurant and the lifestyle component is coming into hotels and really differentiating them because many hotels are just fully commoditized now. And the ones that are special that you and I like to talk about have this thing. And maybe you can talk about how that's changed over the past couple of years and what the thing is.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you bring up a couple of good points. Before getting into it, I would just say I think you're 100% spot on, and I think the biggest challenge that we have in the hotel industry, working with owners and developers, is how do you quantify that? And there is no real metric unless you did a really deep dive in customer intercept to say, would you or would you not stay at this hotel by the thousands, probably change people's thoughts and minds in the development world about how important this is, because it is hard to quantify. But I am in your camp 100%. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased towards the idea that food and beverage is that game changer. Listen, I'll do two different times, and I think in the space. Let's think back to probably or I guess it's probably the mid 90s when Alex opened up the first Ace Hotel in New York City. It became a phenomenon on a global scale. The hotel rooms were unique, but nothing special. They were smaller than most hotel product available, even in Manhattan's marketplace. Yet they were able to command one of the highest premiums in the market, maybe second or third to the Four Seasons at that point in time, which is a hotel I also worked at. And why? What made that hotel so special? When you walked in the front door, they had a DJ, the lights were dark, they had a bar that was running almost 24/7. They had the Breslin, which was this phenomenal food and beverage outlet. They had a coffee roaster and coffee bar in the front of the hotel that was always on, that had that smell of freshly roasted coffee permeating a lobby that in the morning hours had people coming in there in these big oversized leather couches, having a beautiful cappuccino, maybe having a spritz or Bloody Mary and working at their computer. And he created this always on environment through the activation of food and beverage. People wanted to say that they stayed at that hotel, so they gained access above everyone else to what was happening in that lobby and what was happening in the restaurant, and being able to have that coffee moment in the morning and then stay all day long, go up, shower, change, and meet their friends back in the lobby because they were a guest, and hang out at the bar all night long. It was the only thing that changed the dynamic in that hotel, was this always on food and beverage programming. And I think everybody during that period of time really opened up to their eyes to the fact that, wow, this probably isn't that hard. Maybe we should get on that bandwagon too. And then it really started kind of this, I would almost say, not an evolution, but a revolution in people's thinking about the food and beverage in hotels. Obviously, financial markets and challenges in the economy from then through till after, the crisis in 2008, people got a little skeptical about whether or not they would continue to invest in this space. Let's go back down to the core business. Let's just focus on rooms, because that's an extra investment. We're not sure. Again, we can't quantify it, and we're not sure if we're going to get it right. And I think post-pandemic, a couple things have happened. I think the global marketplace is far more educated than ever before in the world of food and beverage. People were stuck at home, having to cook for themselves. For people who have never cooked before, you now turn on standard television programming, and there's not a single, probably prime time network 7 days a week that doesn't have something that's food related on television. People are surrounded by food and beverage content, media, and programming, and now social media. So our guests now are far more educated. They're expecting and demanding more. They have become subject matter experts, maybe even if they're not, in certain aspects of food and beverage. And so when they're coming to hotels, they're seeking it out. And so hotels now are starting to, and great developers like yourself are really leaning into this as an aspect of the experience that we need to really double down on and work possibly, and most likely in the cases of the successful hotels in the market, with third-party food and beverage operators. Because listen, Jake, I do believe that it's, hoteliers do hotels really well. They know how to price their rooms. They know the commercial aspect of that aspect of their business model. Food and beverage, to do it well and to compete with the best restaurants and bars in the communities in which those hotels are located, have to have the knowledge base of what it takes to run an independent restaurant and bar, because you got to be gritty. You got to roll up your sleeves. You got to think about that restaurant in a hotel as its own independent business, because you are competing with, if you want to be great, you are competing with the best restaurant on the corner of Main and Main in the community that you're sitting within. And for a long time, the hotel industry, as a general rule, really lost its way in food and beverage. It was the 3-meal restaurant, it was banquets, and it was a grab and go. And if they checked those 3 boxes, everybody was seemingly happy. But the guests weren't. The guests were walking out the front door, and all of a sudden the hotel industry opened up its eyes and were like, why is everyone leaving our hotel? How come our restaurant's not busy anymore? And I'll give you a great example. When we opened in my years and dozen years with Wolfgang Puck, when we opened Four Seasons at the Beverly Wilshire, we opened Cut there. And when we went into the hotel with Rod Aurora, who is now the president of Rosewood, we walked into the space that they were going to give us, and it had these old quilted chairs and these big armchairs and this kind of like pale blue paisley carpet. It had looked like it had not been touched in maybe 20 years. And I don't know if it had. And no one could really seemingly understand why it wasn't so successful when you had Spago around the corner and you had, Crustacean up the street, all these great Beverly Hills restaurants. And we went in and we took over the space. We turned it into Cut, which was the Michelin star steakhouse. Overnight, that restaurant not only became a success, but the Four Seasons Beverly Wilshire had a whole new life in front of it. Its rates went up. The valet, you could not get down Wilshire because the valet was backed up. And this was not just a flash in the pan. This has gone on for almost 15 years now that this has been the effect on the hotel. The influence of people back into the Four Seasons Beverly Wilshire, the interest of people to book banquets, to book their weddings there, to have Wolf be part of the process and the conversation, changed the dynamic of the hotel, had ownership now starting to reinvest in the hotel because they now saw the opportunity that was sprung off of the investment in Cut. That's when they did the boulevard over in the front of the hotel as well. And so, you just see this very simple investment in a great product that changed that dynamic of that hotel for the better part of 15, 20 years.
Do you think that was because Wolfgang Puck is kind of a Beverly Hills based guy? This is a flagship restaurant. Could anyone else have done that? Was it lucky? Do you think it was fully intentional? I mean, I've been there multiple times and he's there like all the time, shaking hands and kissing babies. And it's unbelievable. A lot of people could easily get turned off, or you see a lot of these other restaurants with the celebrity chef kind of fail after 6 months. How is that different? And what happened there that's very different from a lot of other restaurants that get jammed into a Four Seasons that, aren't as iconic as that one?
Yeah, listen, I think that there's a couple things there. One is obviously Wolf is, in the neighborhood and he's there all the time. He is a brand, he's a personality, he's a celebrity in itself. So that does obviously weigh a lot into it. But more importantly, I would actually say it was the approach towards the concept. Making the concept of a steakhouse approachable for all. When we designed it, when we created the menus for it, when we programmed it, we thought about a steakhouse that would appeal to everyone, to women as well, and to make it not such a gentleman's cigar kind of whiskey environment, but really to have a little bit of femininity to it and to soften the approach, while at the same time really contemporizing it, getting out of the old Frank Sinatra singers and standards in the background and playing Guns N' Roses and
Classic
Aerosmith
rock.
at
Yep.
blaring levels, by the way, in an environment that was so dark you could barely read the menus and you really needed that candle on the table. And you're in this environment where you have, exceptional, highly elevated service, and you're listening to Aerosmith and you're eating a beautiful piece of Japanese Wagyu with a steak presentation at your table that, again, is not like this big board of meat, but this beautiful Bernardo platter, with gorgeous cuts of meat wrapped tableside. Everything about it was different. And to your question, we were bold. We took a chance, but we really thought out what we were going to do. Everything was intentional. The cause and effect of every decision that we made in the service model, in the design model, and in the programming of the space was going to impact that guest experience. And what did we want them to leave with? We wanted them to leave with a little bit of shock and awe. We wanted them to leave with that was one of the best meals, not necessarily steakhouse, one of the best meals I've had, and just an overall great experience. And I think a great restaurateur and a great restaurateur could be a celebrity chef. It could be just an up and coming chef, is someone who really thinks about the details, is very intentional, and really thinks about every single aspect of the guest journey from when they book to when they leave. And that's a lot of details if you think about it. And you'll very often find people saying, that was the best restaurant I've ever been to. Well, what made it so great? They'll ask. And no one could really put a pinpoint on exactly what it was. And I always like to say in my trainings and things like this, it's the collection and the sum of all of the parts that make a great restaurant experience. And if you do it really well, you should almost leave the guests without being able to detail exactly what it was. They just want more. And it's because we hit every mark. And most people will never know all of the things that we did to make it work. And that's okay, as long as they leave and just want more.
One of the unique design elements of that hotel is the restaurant is all on one like open floor plan. And it's wild because in LA, all these places have little like secret areas for the celebrities to go and little hideouts. And that restaurant, everyone can see everyone. So if Leo DiCaprio is sitting here and Steven Spielberg sitting here, which I've been there when that is going on, they're just in the restaurant with everyone. That's pretty interesting. It was pretty unique for LA.
Also very intentional, because Wolf wanted to change what he was doing at Spago. And if you go to Spago, anyone can hide in a corner. Anyone could hide in one of the booths. Anyone could go into a little nook and never be seen throughout the course of their entire meal. This kind of flipped the script, put everybody in one big room. And to add to that, worked with an artist, Martin Scholler, and put giant photographs of all of the celebrities around the room on top of it, if you remember correctly.
Yep.
And I'll remember a certain celebrity couple was going through a divorce, and when one of them came
I remember that too.
We had to switch out one of the photos if everyone of the other one came in for dinner, which was just classic. But it just kind of, it almost poked fun of the scene in Beverly Hills to a degree. But Wolf was part of that scene, so it was okay. You know, you could always do that if you're one of them.
One of the big design challenges that also exists there is, and exists in a lot of hotels, and I want to know how you, in your experience, which has been over many hotels, overcome this. And that's, a lot of people don't want to enter the hotel lobby. They don't want to walk through the hotel to go into the restaurant. And if you've been to Cut, and we're still talking about Cut, you have a bar on one side, and then you have the restaurant on the other side, which is even a more difficult challenge because now you're leaving the bar, you're kind of going into a lobby thing, and then you're going into the restaurant. How did you think about that there? And what gave you the conviction to say we can make it work?
Well, one easy solution was the fact that the valet and the porte cochere was right off of the restaurant entrance. And so you walked up 4 steps and you were inside of Cut. Most people in Los Angeles drove. It's not exactly the biggest walking city. If you were coming maybe over from, at the time, it was the Montage, it was only like less than a block away. And so you walk in through the front, but the front of that hotel was very ornate, very welcoming, which was the juxtaposition between this kind of older historic building, a kind of an ornate lobby, and then this very modern, very sleek restaurant. Really, I also find from a design point of view, I love that juxtaposition between those two environments, because what that does for the guests is it takes them out of that room experience that they might actually quite love and puts them into this entirely new environment. And all they needed to do was go downstairs. And I also think that that's a real miss on the part of the hotel world, where we're designing our restaurants to make them look like our lobbies. We're using the same ID firm. So it's the same color palette, same texture, same materiality. And all of a sudden it just becomes everywhere. And designers, for right or for wrong, just can't get out of their own way that they need to be able to do this because there needs to be continuity. And I argue that point for the point I just made. People, if you want to keep people inside of your hotel, you have to find ways that are just beyond the food and beverage itself. You have to find ways through the art of design to be able to change that experience, to create these different moments within the hotel. And if you have that departure when you walk into a space, you feel like you've been transported into this entirely new environment with different music, different lighting, different uniforms, different color palette, different materiality. And then you walk back in and you're like, oh, I could go upstairs to my room now. How convenient. I could have done the same thing if I walked across the street to an independent restaurant. And that's, I think, a big miss on the part of the hotel world, because we still just, they still just haven't gotten it right. Not consistently, at least.
What's the best way to get it right? Is it just hiring a separate design firm?
100%. Absolutely 100%. I don't think that there's really an option, because I've tried it all. And the only way I've seen success is if you work with independent restaurant design firms, not hotel design firms or home interior design firms. You work with independent restaurant design firms that really understand how spaces should function, that are embracing the concept narrative and bringing that to life. And if you have 2 or 3, the best hotels are the ones that have 2 or 3 independent design firms on top of your design firm that's doing the hotel, your room product, your common areas, your banquets, meetings, and events. That's fine. But I think when it comes down to food and beverage, diversification here helps to do just that. Diversify the experiences for your guests, where every single moment is highly unique and highly designed. There's very few design firms or interior designers that I think can meet that goal. But I do think the ones that do that, and I would say Ken Falk is probably one of them, because he's embracing that highly textured, highly rich in pattern and function in the space by space. And so that stylistic approach that he has, which I think is brilliant, he takes that and he leans in on what those spaces should be, even if it isn't maybe some of the common areas that you'd see. And he's obviously done some of the private clubs in New York and things of this nature, where you could really kind of put a testament to that.
How important is layout? And when you're kind of thinking about a restaurant, maybe it's in a hotel, maybe it's not in a hotel, maybe it's standalone. Are there certain tricks or things when you're telling an architect or you're telling a designer that it has to be a certain way? I want my bar, I don't know, for example, in the middle of the room. Soho House, it always seems like the room surrounds the bar, and that's kind of their style. Are there things and techniques that you've learned that are kind of must-haves and table stakes as you're thinking through a design?
Listen, I think one of the things that I'll always look at first is what exactly is the experience that we're trying to create? What is the story that we're trying to convey to our guests? What is the narrative of that space? That's kind of the first building block, and then taking that narrative and taking that out through the form of design. Now, a high-end 2 or 3 Michelin star experience like your French Laundries of the world, you're not going to necessarily lean in on a very big bar moment. Really, it's all about the food. It's all about the cuisine. But if you're talking about maybe for the hotel world, or for maybe the larger market of dining in America, bar is one of my biggest and most important focuses, because it becomes a place that creates energy. It becomes a place for people to gather, for people to just have one small bite or an entire meal, but becomes the fuel and the engine of energy for the rest of the dining room, because no one ever wants to eat in a quiet, empty restaurant. But we do have those shoulder moments in the dining experience, your early 5:30 reservations and your very late reservations. Typically, if you have a really good and activated bar, that empty and quieter dining room is being carried by an energy that's coming from your post-work happy hour, early cocktail crowd, and then your late night crowd. So the guests in the dining room, if they are that 5:30 reservation, and they're going into a restaurant dining room that maybe only has 2 or 3 tables, hopefully they'll be getting some energy in the room from a really good and activated bar experience. Also, I like bars front and center. I like to walk into a restaurant and see a really busy, full bar with professional bartenders, with all the kit in front of them to make a really good cocktail, and that those cues to a guest and a real foodie that says, I bet you that looks like they're probably doing some really good drinks over there, just from the merchandising and the design and the styling of a bar, the equipment that they use. So those are like these silent signals that this is probably going to be really good, because I could see someone over there burning an orange peel over that Negroni, and maybe that's going to be really delicious. Maybe I'll have a drink first, or maybe I'll come back to the bar after, capturing more dollars from that guest and encouraging them to be in the inside of that moment. So I think that that's one of the biggest things from a design point of view I would focus on. The second thing is, I really do not care for restaurants that have the kitchen access coming into the dining room space. How do you mask that? How do you hide that path of traffic from your employees? How do you bury some of that? If it's not an open kitchen, then keep it behind the scenes. And then make sure that the way of the employee going in and out of those spaces has been hidden by, the way that you've designed in the architecture of the space, because no one wants to see into any of that. It's either you make it open or you don't.
You have a really unique career where you've worked for a long time for independent restaurant operators, kind of on a global scale, but then you've also worked for hotels. So you kind of have been on both sides. How do the best restaurant people think about restaurants, and how do the best hotel restaurant people think about restaurants in hotels? And are there some similarities that you've learned to figure out, or is it like each property kind of, you need to just say, hey, this one we can do the restaurant ourselves, or this one we need to bring in a third party?
Listen, every single, in the independent restaurant world, it's, finding the right location. It's making sure that the product that you're going to be in, the concept that you're going to put in that location, is going to meet the market and fill a white space and try to change something that the people in that particular market are looking for. In the hotel environment, I think every hotel should be treated independently. There should not be this blanket approach towards the 3-meal restaurant, the bar, the grab and go. If you do that, I think that just puts you automatically to the sea of sameness. I think what you want to do is really look at every single hotel and build it for the community of which it lives. When we were designing, restaurant and bar experiences, the very first market studies we would do would never be what hotels are in the market. We would never even that would be second or third question we'd ask ourselves. The very first, we'd pick up Eater, we pick up the local newspaper reviews, we would look on James Beard, we would look on 50 World's Best. What is the independent restaurant and bar market inside of that community doing right now? Who's leading the market? What are people talking about, and why? And then we'd get boots on the ground and we would go and eat in all of those restaurants. We'd spend time, we'd study them. We'd really try to see what's making them click, the type of guest that was coming in. Why were they coming in? What were they using the space for? Was it business? Was it leisure? Was it regular? And we would spend sometimes a week or more in these markets just going to the same restaurants over and over and over again to figure out what it was we needed to do to capture a piece of that business and bring it into our hotel. Because we did that, again, built it for that market to compete with them, we would find great success.
We're looking at buying a hotel right now, and it's like a boutique kind of resorty hotel, somewhat small, and the restaurant operations at the hotel are just okay. It's not really that profitable. Everyone says it could be a lot better. If you're coming into a position like that, how would you approach fixing, revamping? Maybe it's a combination of restaurants and catering, bar. How would you kind of holistically looking at that from a fresh perspective, go in and try and figure out what the problem is and fix it?
Again, first things first, get on the ground, understand the marketplace, understand what the competition looks like, boutique hotel or not. Find out what is going to be needed for that hotel to start to attract more guests to come to it. Because I also believe that if you do a really good job with your restaurant, Jake, and your bar program, the impact, again, somewhat hard to quantify the impact on banquets, meetings, and events, because now all of a sudden people want to get married there. People want to have their holiday party there. They want to have their bar mitzvah there. They want to do events in that hotel because the food and beverage at that restaurant is so good, even if they've never had meals and banquets. And so how do you make sure, especially if there's meetings and events inside of this space, how are you going to capture that market? Because you've got to really nail your restaurant, especially in the resort environment where there's probably weddings and things of this nature. And so you go in, you look at the design, you look at the current menu programming, you look at their pricing structure, you look at their OS&E, you look at their design, you really do an audit of every single element that you would do as if you were starting over. Find out what could be salvaged, what could be saved, find out what needs to get fixed, or worst case scenario, we have to do a full revamp and a repositioning. Sometimes that might be the only answer. And I'll tell you why, because people, restaurants, they have the ability to leave this legacy impression on people. And if they went there once and it wasn't very good, and it's still the same restaurant that was never very good, the entire community knows it's not very good. And so you really don't have a choice. And so you could continue to feed money into, putting good money to bad, or just bite the bullet and say, you know what, we just need to tackle this, and we need to revamp, redesign, reposition, new marketing strategy, new social media strategy. Penny wise, pound foolish sometimes in this business, Jake. And you look at some things, be like, why did they waste their money? You shake your head. And for me, as a consummate restaurant guy, you look at some of these deals and knowing that you're putting 100, 150, 200, 300 or more $1 million into a hotel, and we're splitting hairs over $1.5 million that we need to just do a little bit of a refresh and a rebrand, kind of seems a little silly to me. I mean, you're really, when it's going to impact your business so much, albeit unquantifiable, it is going to impact your business so much. Why are we splitting hairs on something that's really so important on helping your hotel reposition itself in a market?
I want to go back to talking a little bit more about your career. So I think after we met, actually, when you were at Wolfgang Puck. So I was getting married at the Hotel Bel Air. Wolfgang Puck does the whole food program there. And everything you're saying is 100% correct. Like, the food was phenomenal. But what was unique there is Wolfgang also did all the banquet and the event food, which is sometimes unique because a lot of restaurants maybe wouldn't do that. But the food felt like it was coming from a restaurant kitchen. In that case, it actually was coming from the restaurant kitchen. It was so small. And that's where we met.
I remember that. I remember where you sat that evening, actually. I still remember that night.
We had a whole
long
dinner.
time ago.
It was great. And
Tiffany was taking care of you, and yeah.
Tiffany Lai, a big shout out. I think she's still the director of catering at the Hotel Bel Air.
She's actually the hotel manager now. She's the hotel manager. Yeah.
Good for her. I need to reach out to her.
She's great. We still,
oh my gosh.
My wife and I, even though I don't work there, we still try to go there for a week every year, and we almost never leave the hotel.
It's amazing. I haven't been back for 2 or 3 years. And I mean, a hotel like that could probably only exist in Bel Air, Beverly Hills. It's like in a neighborhood.
I know. It's magical.
The whole thing doesn't make any sense, but it's completely magical. It's completely magical. You were involved in the opening of that hotel. What was that like?
Well, listen, it was obviously, like you said, it's a legacy asset. And it was interesting because Wolf came in, I like to refer to the Bel Air as like the neighborhood country club that wasn't a private club, because the people that lived in that community used the food and beverage, the restaurant, the bar at that hotel on a daily basis. And it was really interesting for Wolf. I came in a little bit after they had come in, probably about maybe 6 months after Wolf had taken over, because I was living in Singapore for the previous 5 years. And when I got there, there was a fair amount of resistance from the neighborhood on the programming and what Wolf was doing from a food and beverage offering. Probably in that particular case, they didn't take enough time to respect and understand that the community and the neighborhood was the baseline engine that we needed to continue to support for the fuel of that business, because if frankly, if you piss them off, they were not bringing their families and their friends' weddings, bar mitzvahs, and everything else to that hotel, nor were
What
they
was pissing them off?
Well, the food was too elevated. They got rid of some of their staples. I can't tell you how many times I was told that they couldn't understand why we didn't have chicken pot pie in the menu on Sunday nights, and why can't I get a hot dog in the bar? Because again, it was like a country club. And the pricing strategy that we were using, no matter maybe the demographic in that particular community, they still wanted their $12 glass of Chardonnay. And oh yeah. And so it was an interesting journey. I came in, but again, I think maybe one of my superpowers is truly understanding what the customer wants, because ultimately, Jake, it's not about what you and I want. It's not about what we need or what we may even believe. The guests will tell us what they want. And if you do a really good job and you take care of the guests and you meet the needs of the market that you're building for, everything else will figure itself out. And so Wolf and I and the team had some good and hard conversations and said, okay, every single night of the week, we're going to have a different blue plate special. We had meatloaf, we had fried chicken, we had chicken pot pie, and we did this great wines by the glass program for a couple of friends and celebrities who will remain nameless that were price appropriate. And I'll tell you, we did a campaign. I did a reach out. I hosted almost 150 neighbors from the Bel Air community. I brought them in. I sent the personal invitations, wrote handwritten cards, and I invited every single one of them to this little mixer to welcome them back to the new Bel Air. Gave them free valet parking, introduced the new menu, did a little bit of almost like a reception party with bites of all of the new food that we were going to feature, and a printout of the menus with the prices. I would say 60 days on, we were full. Every single night they were coming in. I want to have my wedding here. I'm going to do a little girls baby shower here. I want to do all of these events. And can you make sure we could do whatever other menus items you want, but can you put the chicken pot pie on? And, make sure let Wolf do what he wants, but can you just ask him that I just want to have the fried chicken? So what we were able to do was we were able to meet them where they were, still be able to execute the classic Wolfgang Puck dishes, very elevated food, and foie gras, sweetbreads, and things that were really high end and elevated, and chicken pot pie and fried chicken. And we mixed the two worlds together. And it was incredible what happened. Again, because all of a sudden the neighborhood became the people that were filling the seats and filling the bar. And so every night people were coming in and they just couldn't get in, but the neighborhood got preference. Right. And so we just completely changed the dynamic. And like I said, it's not about what Wolf wanted or what I wanted. It was about what they wanted. And ultimately it became the success of that F&B program.
I'm curious to know, since you spent so much time in Singapore, and I was recently in Europe, and just the service culture is very different. And it's different in Asia too. But in Europe, it's like people are just a career waiter for their whole life. And the chef and culinary programs are completely different. And can you talk about what that's like and how you see the future of whether it's hospitality or food and beverage in the United States from a labor standpoint? Because, you have an incredible, if you look at your resume, you have like 10 years here, 10 years here, 5 years here. If you look at a lot of other people in the industry, it's like 1 year, 6 months, 2 years, 1 year, 6 months. It's all over the place. And you're kind of an anomaly. So I'm curious to get your take on like a little bit of the labor issues and challenges and opportunities in the United States, but kind of from the lens of looking at it globally as you have.
Yeah, listen, in Asia Pacific, I think the challenges were very different, but still very real, which was the society I would say as a general rule, minus probably Japan and Korea. Outside of Japan and Korea, the service industry is not a career. It's just a means to an end. And it's not necessarily at least in 2008 when I moved to Singapore, and I spent almost 10 years there. I did 2 separate stints, almost 5 and 5. And in the time that I got there, I was really shocked to learn that society just didn't really give much regard to people in the service industry, that it was looked at as a very low labor, low class job at no matter what level of restaurant or hotel that you worked at, because you were looked at as a servant for other people. And so that I found quite interesting, especially in Singapore. However, I will say, and I do give an incredible amount of credit, and I think anybody would, to what happened with Marina Bay Sands and Las Vegas Sands Corporation, Dr. Adelson and Sheldon Adelson, when they opened Marina Bay Sands, which was where I brought Cut to when I was with Wolf. That hotel employed 10,000 people at the time. In food and beverage alone, we had 3,000 employees. I became the executive director of food and beverage for that hotel, and it was doing something, I think, circa 250 million in F&B revenue without banquets and catering. So I think our total portfolio was close to $500 million in just F&B. And with 3,000 employees and having a lot of this Western influence come in, it was Wolfgang Puck, it was Gordon Ramsay, Danielle Boulou, Guy Savoy, Santi Santamaria, Tetsuya Wakuda, these incredible brands that really brought with them, by the way, teams of people from all over the world that came from cultures that specialized in service and made this was their career, this was their life. The change in the marketplace from 2008 to today, Singapore is now maybe one of the global leaders by country in having some of the best restaurants and the highest number of 50 world's best in one market. And by the way, you could drive in 45 minutes from one side of the country to the other. It's the little red dot because it is a little tiny country, but the concentration of people in that market, the concentration of incredible F&B with local Singaporean professionals that have really embraced this, that were educated, that became most of the people in all the great restaurants that are in Singapore right now have all probably come out of Marina Bay Sands. And because we produced so much talent in that, great training, great education, opportunity for growth, opportunity for you to have not only a living, but a career that you could grow and to excel and find personal wealth for you and your family, and a long, stable opportunity for ongoing career path of a future for you. And it's remarkable to go back to this country now and to see what's happened. But Asia now, I think, is really starting as a result of the influence of this Western market. European chefs and restaurateurs coming to places like Macau, coming to places like Cambodia and Vietnam, and bringing this culture. The locals are embracing it, they're supporting it, and the locals as guests are starting to see and appreciate and respect. So it's really become almost this complete holistic view of the industry. The Culinary Institute of America, which I'm a board member of, has opened a campus in Singapore, which is wildly successful. And that was funded by the Singapore government. So they really leaned in on this. They saw that there was a gap in the marketplace and they wanted to have tourism to be increased in Singapore. They wanted people to look at Singapore as the destination country within Asia Pacific. And they used service, hospitality, and food and beverage and restaurants as a gateway to tourism. And you just have to look at the economics of that market now and to see what's happening there and understand, like I said before, the highest concentration of world's 50 best in Asia Pacific is in Singapore. You look at the United States market, it is varied, Jake, because you have really difficult labor conditions in certain markets. Places like California, New York, Chicago, really hard to do business. The economics of a restaurateur, you have to really, again, the restaurant business is hard and you really have to be passionate about what it is that you do if you're going to operate in these markets, because where maybe places like Texas or Florida or the Carolinas, etc., you could see 25, 35% profitability in F&B. If you can get to 8 to 10% in those other markets, it'd be a really good day. And it's a lot of work for 8 to 10%, And so the challenges I see in the United States are labor driven. And the fact that there's just not enough people to support what the industry needs. We need more good people. We need people who see this as a career, who, see this as the opportunity to grow, who is a 16-year-old, high school student like myself, who found something that they were passionate about, who had people around them that encourage them to understand that if this is what you really want to do, you can make a great life of it. You can make a career out of it. You can be extremely successful in our industry. And I think that that's what's lacking. Where again, to the European model, people still to this day, they go right out of high school. Their number one choice is not to go to London School of Economics or Cambridge, but it's to go to L'École or one of the great hotel schools. That is a first choice. And it's, by the way, as highly regarded as if you were going to Harvard. And that is the difference in the European model, because what happens is you get this incredibly passionate individual that's well educated in this space, that has the work experience, that then also goes out into the industry, not only in that market, but now infiltrating into the Middle East. And so if you go to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, that you're seeing mostly Europeans, French, Spanish, Italian, and British, all flooding that marketplace, bring all their skill set, their education, their talent, and their experience to that market. And again, Dubai is another one, a food city that is just absolutely on fire. And they're able to execute it at such a high level because they have the skill set of the individuals now to do it, because they're coming mostly from Europe.
One thing that always surprises me, and we go to the hot cities in Europe, right? I'm talking about the bigger cities. Maybe it's Paris, or we were just on the Amalfi Coast. I'm always surprised by the amount of young people. There's some old people there, but the amount of young people in very prominent service positions or exuding just an amazing skill level. You go somewhere in Europe and you have a 22-year-old kid like beautifully filleting a fish right at your table. In the United States, you have to bring over the manager to do that work. Here, every kid in Europe just knows how to, I guess, fillet the fish. We were just staying at Hotel Coste in Paris, which is a first for me, which kind of blew my mind actually, because typically when we go to Paris, we stay in, these big palace hotels. And for those that don't know, there's like maybe 6 palace hotels in Paris. It's just a crazy luxury hotel that looks like you're like in the Louis XIV days, but like one designation is they have to have a pool. I think like that's like one of the key points. And Hotel Coste is kind of in this area, but it has this unbelievable restaurant and this unbelievable reputation. And staying in the hotel was a unique experience because we stayed in the new part. The rooms are so beautiful. And when you go to the restaurant, if you're staying in the hotel, and typically if you go to the restaurant, you're American, they don't take reservations. You've got to do a little greasing. You've got to kind of finagle to get a table. But when you're staying in the hotel, they say, "Great to see you. Which table do you want?" They know we're staying in a hotel. You can pick any table in the restaurant that you want. And it's such an amazing experience. And then the waiters and waitresses they have are basically like supermodels in not in uniform, but like just their normal supermodel type clothes, which is a beautiful look, so professional and just so young. It's just fascinating to me. And obviously those are maybe one-off places, but it's pretty cool. And it's just very hard to execute like that in the US. Like maybe there's a couple places in New York that kind of hit a similar note, but it's hard.
Yeah, it is. I think culturally, obviously, surrounded by that style of service, understanding that, generationally, it is looked at as a profession. It is looked at as a very highly respected profession. And so at a young age, if you see it, you get a little bit of a sample or taste for it. It's no wonder that there's a younger generation out there that's able to execute at that level. And again, environments that really embrace training their teams. I think this notion of, open up the doors and it's all going to work. And I've seen, restaurants and hotels, we have a 5-day training program. We have a 7-day training program. And I was like, well, actually, in my world, it's more like 3 weeks because you'll find out what the result was. Again, penny wise, pound foolish. Just pay for the extra 2 weeks of training, give people the education. And also, understanding that maybe some of the workforce that we're dealing with, especially here in the United States, they've not had this exposure. They've not had the opportunity for education. They may not be in this industry for the rest of their life. But if you give them a really good education, you put structure, guidance, and discipline around this type of education and training, albeit in food and beverage, people embrace that. People like to work within an environment of structure and discipline. They might not always say it, but I truly believe that they do. And they also like to learn, but sometimes you got to bring it out of them and be active in their training process, being engaged in their training process, and giving them something that maybe one day they can lean back on and use. Or even better, when they get out onto the floor and they're working in front of a guest and they have that first opportunity to do a fillet of fish and they do it very successfully and they have the reaction from the guest that's sitting in front of them, that feeling of pride, that feeling of ownership that 4 or 5 weeks ago, I would never even think about doing this. And here I am now standing in front of you. And oh, by the way, you're going to give me a tip for that service that I just provided to you. And you're going to maybe even give me more because I was able to provide a service for you that was highly elevated, that you didn't expect, and that I nailed. I, as the employee, am going to walk away feeling pretty good about myself. And that's going to maybe bring me back to work the next day and the next day and the next day. And that leadership in this industry, it's, that has to be kept evergreen. We can't just open and train and then leave it at the door. It is an environment where you have to be engaged with your people. You have to continue to train them, continue to nourish them, and find if they feel like they're kind of stagnant, challenge them even more. Start opening up the aperture to more aspects of the industry because it's ever evolving and there's a lot to learn if you want to be really great. And I think that that's where some of the best leaders in the restaurant and hospitality space too, because ultimately you're only as good as your people, Jake, as we know, and it takes someone who's going to be really committed to them and committed to their growth and development.
We've talked a lot about food and beverage, but you've spent a lot of your career working actually for hotel companies. So I want to talk about the hotel part of the business now as well. How did you start to kind of move and migrate into hotels? And what have you been doing in hotels? And what gives you energy in hotels?
Yeah, interestingly enough, Jake, it was quite organic. It was never really planned. I can tell you that nothing actually in my career was quite planned other than I just knew I wanted to be in the restaurant and hospitality industry. Everything has happened quite naturally from there. I would say for sure, working with, when I moved to right out of Culinary Institute of America, my first job was at the Four Seasons, New York. I was recruited out of the Culinary Institute of America. At the time, the restaurant in that hotel was a 3-star New York Times restaurant. Susan Weaver was the chef. She was highly regarded. She went on to become Oprah's personal and private chef. And it had a great reputation in the bar. The 5757 was like the hottest bar in Manhattan, the most expensive martini in Manhattan, and people would line up down the stairs out onto 58th Street. I'll never forget those days. And again, that passion, that excitement that I had when I was 16 years old carried through to another environment that was like at the top of its game. And whilst it was in the Four Seasons, it was very much a restaurant and bar environment inside of that hotel. That took me to Vegas because at the time when I was in New York, I kind of grown up in and out of New York City my entire life, and I wanted to do something different and I could do something off the East Coast. So as any young 22, 23-year-old person would do, sell everything you have, buy a car, and move to Vegas with no job. I saw the opportunity that's happening in the industry in Vegas, but all of the restaurants that I worked at with Wolfgang Puck in Vegas were in casinos. So while it's not maybe boutique hotels or luxury hotels, they were all in these big hotel world environments. So I really took an appreciation and an interest in how they operated more than anything else. It was hospitality, just differently executed differently and to a different customer base based off of the kind of hotel that you were in. That took me again to the more casino world in Singapore. And then really the transition happened when I was recruited by Capella Hotels and Resorts. Capella Hotels and Resorts, one of the number one luxury hotel companies in the world now, I think, in travel and leisure. The Cui family that started and founded that company, friends of mine, and brought me over. I was vice president of operations for the company. And that gave me the opportunity, and the interest for me in joining Capella was it was beyond food and beverage. I was the vice president of operations for rooms, spa, and all hotel product. And so that really gave me the opportunity to challenge myself, to learn more about the business. I think that that's probably something that's in my DNA, just naturally trying to take on more challenging projects, bigger roles that take and leverage my experience with the core of hospitality and putting that to action into play against different disciplines within the industry. That was a brilliant experience. And I absolutely loved working with Capella and have the utmost everything. I mean, Evan Cui, the founder, is, really focused on quality. He's really focused on setting himself apart from the sea of sameness in the small touches, the silent signals of hospitality without people knowing it. Like we talked about, the details really matter. And you've never really met anybody that's more focused on details than him, probably. And also gave an incredible amount of respect towards food and beverage programming at the hotel, quality of the bars, quality of the restaurants, design of the spaces, differentiated design in the restaurant, differentiated design in the bar, different designers, world-class designers that were at the top of their game, and bringing them in. And also would, for the Capella brand, finding, historical sites, protected sites, and landmarks, and modernizing them while still respecting the asset in its truest form. And so, with the Capella brand, everything was about the details and the quality of service, the ratio of team member to guest. And, I had the incredible opportunity, albeit the shortest time I've ever worked for a company, to work on a couple great assets, the Capella Bangkok, Capella Sydney, the old sandstone buildings in Sydney, which my wife and I just went to 2 years ago for Christmas. Maybe one of the best hotels I've stayed at in the world, the Capella Sydney. And it's incredible how many people that I've met that don't know that I've gone to, that I worked with Capella, that have gone to Sydney and said, I stayed at this hotel. Have you ever heard of this hotel called the Capella Sydney? Because it's a small brand. There's only maybe 13 or 14 assets. And I said, I have. And I was like, tell me what made you like it so much? And they're like, I don't know. It's just everything, It's like one of those moments, right? It was just everything. Great restaurants, great bars, great design, incredible spa, but they do it right. And I had the opportunity to work on that as well as the patina in the Maldives. So just a great opportunity to build, to grow, to develop. I also found through that process in the hotel space, I loved building. I love the development aspect of things and being part of the framework of the architecture and the design and seeing that come to fruition in the final product. And then, the last 7 years, I was recruited by Hilton to come to the United States. Whilst I loved the job with Capella, I'd been in Singapore, like I had mentioned, for the better part of 10 years. My wife and my family is here in the United States. Our parents were getting older. I'd been gone for a long time. And this gave us the opportunity to come home, to be closer to our family and, arguably take on a much, much bigger role. At the time, I was the vice president of food and beverage for luxury and lifestyle brands for Hilton. That was about 11 months before COVID, and was very unsure of what my existence would look like during that period of time, since I was really the new kid on the street in a brand new vertical that was set up by the organization. However, they had made the decision during the COVID period to furlough everyone in global food and beverage, but they kept me. And so I was responsible for spearheading not just luxury and lifestyle, but all brands. At the time, it was 18. So everything from Hampton to Waldorf Astoria. So my first time dealing in a focus service and all suite space. So had to dig deep into my culinary background to think about what we were going to do to differentiate those brands.
The Jimmy John's sausage breakfast patties or something, right? The microwavables.
I'll be honest with you, that was maybe the most exciting part of the time that I was with them because I really got to take my culinary background and put it to a very tangible impact into the hotels by differentiating those programs and coming out of COVID on the other side with cost savings for owners and a higher quality product and guest satisfaction, which was great. But that experience took me to be the SVP of all brands for food and beverage. And then for the last almost 3 years, I've been the senior vice president of food and beverage, wellness, and design for Hilton, which takes me to today, where I am now in the market and I am consulting and having a really good time working with people within the industry in food and beverage and other, thinking about the future of their company and their program while I kind of figure out the next step in my career.
I want to go back to the Capella conversation. You mentioned Evan had this intense focus around details. Are there some details or some memories that come to mind that really explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I remember we were doing the interior of the rooms over at the Capella in Singapore. And at the time, I think we were in discussions with Andre Fu, and which he had used in a few other of his projects, and an incredible designer. And we were looking at a couple different things. Evan hated white sheets, and we were looking at different color palettes of sheets for the bed because the sheets were just too stark and too glaring in the room color palette, which was of these soft grays and blues. And so we had gone through, I can't tell you how many different shades, Pantone colors of sheets. I think I was keeping the team at Frette on their toes without question. It was too blue, it was too gray, it was too dark. And then once we got the sheets, what was the throw over the sheets? And what color in the gray category was that going to be? Because really the brand and the room product really needed to be a space of tranquility for the guest. And doing that through design and color palette was really important. And then we wanted to upgrade the TVs. And then it was all about the technology in the room and making the technology functional, but yet best in class. And so I had worked with a company in Singapore that brought every TV brand of the highest quality, Bang & Olufsen brands you never heard of before, that we tested out. We slept in the rooms, we used the TVs, we used the technology. You would maybe take months to decide on one single piece that would impact every single hotel room, as opposed to here, where I think, for all intents and purposes, we're like, Samsung 65-inch, great, let's roll it out. It's pretty straightforward. When you debate for months over the right size and the right brand TV and the impact on the room, that's when you're really getting into the details, and that's, for me, I kind of feed off of that, and getting into the weeds on things that maybe some people think are trivial. But again, back to my earlier point, even with restaurants, details matter. And it's all about taking the time and the attention to really thinking through every aspect of the guest journey, from the color of the sheets to how much the TV glows and impacts the room when you're trying to sleep, and how much that could really change people's wind down hour. All of these things are really important, which again, I think was a brilliant part of that experience.
You mentioned an Asian designer that I've never heard of, and I've never worked with any Asian designers. I'm curious, how are they different from a lot of the American or European designers that we see in some of the great hotels?
Yeah, I think, listen, they understand the customer base. There's for the most part, it is, I would say, I don't know the exact statistic, but predominantly regional travel, right? There's not an overwhelm. While there is a lot more inbound travel from the US and the European market into Asia, especially over the last 20 years, it is a very big region with a high concentration of people. And so the Asian customer base has certain aspects of their hotel experience that they want and that they look for: color palette, materiality, things that make them feel at home and comfortable in their space, where maybe the European model is a little bit more ornate in their design styles. And kind of, if you go back historically to what that European hotel product is, ornate coffered ceilings and maybe gold leaf and big columns and a lot of marble, where maybe you go to Asia or Pacific, China, and looking at maybe more of the regal hotels in those markets, there is a lot of black lacquer wood. There's a lot of gold. So certain color palettes, certain materialities will always present themselves more than they would in other markets. And so working with designers in those markets, even if you're trying to contemporize a space, still understand what that particular customer is looking for, making sure when you're designing the bathroom and understanding that you're programming the bathroom with the lighting on the floor, the warmed floors in all of your hotel rooms, very important, making sure that you have the Japanese toilet fixtures and everything that goes along with that, where we do not have that in the United States, and the European model is actually getting out of that. And so the Bel Air does. It does. It's very nice. I like the warm floors in the morning. So does my wife. But, I think, again, leaning into maybe the customer base, who's coming to Los Angeles, what's the premium customer coming to Los Angeles? Again, being very smart and intentional about why they program that hotel, maybe in their room fixtures, the way they did. Who do they want staying there? And making sure that they're building it for them too. But some of those, that's where I think you see some of those nuances, because they do kind of really understand the customer base, and they're building and designing against that.
You have this awesome opportunity right now in your career where you've had this amazing history and experience to now think about what you want to do going forward. Not necessarily in the career trajectory, but like, what do you think is a big, almost white space or a big opportunity in hospitality today, or hospitality, food and beverage related, where from an entrepreneur standpoint, or someone like you or me, that you would maybe want to focus there?
Listen, I think that there is an incredible amount of culinary talent in the United States. I think that there are some incredible brands in the United States. And where I see the road and the opportunity is to take, while there's gaps in the hotel space, find a way to bring some of this culinary talent to your boutique and lifestyle hotels, to even your full service hotels. Find a way to introduce them more broadly than these just one-off celebrity chef management agreements. Listen, all of the big chefs that are out there in the marketplace are all personal friends, and they are phenomenal at what they do. But there's a whole nother generation, Jake, of great culinary talent that's out there in the marketplace that deserves to have a broader audience. But in many cases, because they're small, don't have the exposure. They don't have the bench strength in their corporate model, because their corporate model might just be the chef and the general manager, to be able to help them to grow, to be able to help them get into that next phase. And so I think that there's a world where this young, up-and-coming culinary talent that has incredible product, incredible reputation, highly celebrated in the market, and bring them into the hotel world for smaller boutique, up-and-coming luxury hotels, and run F&B programs for those hotels. Take their DNA, take their ethos, take their culinary chops and their understanding of restaurant business and hospitality, and give them the opportunity to give them that showcase in other markets in the United States and help them grow. It helps the hotel reposition themselves as being a real leader in culinary. It creates interest and intrigue in your hotel by this new celebrated and awarded chef from X city that maybe they've never heard of. And as long as we perform, and as long as those chefs show up every day with great food and great hospitality, well, both owner, developer, and restaurateur can win. And I think it's a time that in the market that, it's the new generation. And I think we should celebrate that young up and coming talent that's in the marketplace.
So I find a great duo, a chef and a general manager. They have a restaurant at kind of some up and coming part of town, like in a warehouse district, and it's hot place, well reviewed. and I want to bring him to my hotel. Maybe it's an hour away, maybe it's 2 hours away. Like, how do I technically do that? Are they just basically concepting and writing a menu, but like checking in once a month? Or is it now a kind of thing where they're like actually cooking a couple like days a week and, it's basically their restaurant, but a second restaurant? Like, how does that actually work to be more than just like copy and pasting someone's name, but it's not really them?
Well, it should be them. I mean, I think in this particular instance, I am not looking at, again, some of those other chefs that are in the marketplace that attach their names to restaurants, but they've never been or they never go. This is something that would be much more highly involved. They would take their executive sous chef, they would take their pastry chef, they would take their general manager or their assistant general manager. They're always setting up for that next opportunity. They're deploying them to that hotel product. They would be employees of the hotel, like a kind of a management agreement. It's a way to grow their team, but it also brings the culture of the organization. It brings the standards of food quality and beverage quality to the organization that it's joining and it's setting up shop. I would encourage that there would be a very strong and a strong presence and long presence of the executive chef and owner or general manager from the original asset on campus in that new location for the better part of the first 6 months. And then they start to probably just now come monthly. And then maybe the year after that, maybe it's every other month. And so on it goes until they've really established a strong foothold in the market, that they've dialed in the service, that it's running like a well-oiled machine, that it's built a reputation. They make themselves fully available for marketing, communications, social media, any type of PR activations. And it does become a second outpost for them. The hotel owner is putting up the TI and taking the risk. And so on their part, their contribution and getting any type of fees that they would get would be their participation. And that is both physical and all of their IP.
So let's just say I have someone like you on my team where we could launch a restaurant ourselves without an up-and-coming chef, or we could hire an up-and-coming chef and let them do it. How do I decide which way to go? Is it location dependent?
Good question. I mean, I think, listen, if you had someone maybe that had a background in restaurants and experience, maybe similar to myself, you would, and maybe encouraged to take the approach of following the other path, which is, and both could be equal, by the way, because I still feel very strongly about this. Not every hotel needs to do this, by the way, because maybe the market might not tell you it needs to do this, right? But you believe in all of the other parts of the business and the location and the competition in the market, because sometimes you might get an asset where you are the hotel. You are maybe the place to drink and eat in that marketplace without having to do much to do it. But if you go into a market where the competition, and I know we're, in South Florida, it's up and coming, and the competition is starting to get real. Well, then you got to think about what cards you're going to play. Now, again, if you have culinary chops inside of your organization and restaurant tour chops inside of your organization, you follow the same methodology of any great restaurateur. You start with the concept. You work with a badass branding agency. You create an entire brand package. You invest in the marketing. You invest in the social media. You invest in the communications, and you build the brand whilst at the same time you're executing the product. And that is typically where it falls, because they'll get a great chef, and they'll get a great general manager, and they'll get a brand. They'll create a brand. They'll work with an ID firm. They'll create a brand. They'll get some collaterals. They'll open up the door, and they should just expect it to work. But if you're going to take this model, you have to put the energy around it. You have to put the investment in the marketing and the social, and you have to build a brand. The other side is with these other groups that you're working with, they've taken the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and they've already built that brand. So you're buying into something that's already established. But if you're going to go the other direction, you can't just think if you build it, they will come. You really need to put all of the energy around that brand development and that brand building. So that's the trade-off. Either way, there's a commitment. Either way, there's a financial commitment. It depends on the market. It depends on the path you want to take, and it really depends on the hotel that you're building it for. And maybe there's multiple assets inside that hotel, multiple food and beverage assets inside of that hotel. If you have multiple venues, you do one with a branded chef partner or group, then you could do the rest on your own. And if they're really good, you're going to be leveraging that for the other outlets in your hotel. But you have to take the same methodology. You have to get a great branding and ID firm. You have to build the collaterals. You have to build the marketing campaigns. You have to build the social. And now you've kind of leveraged the fact that you already have something there. And if you've done the same type of approach with marketing and activation on the other, well, then you become quite dangerous, because now you have all of these spaces that have such strong brands inside of one particular hotel. Well, that hotel becomes very interesting to the marketplace all of a sudden, because there's 3 different types of experiences under one roof that, you've just had to take a little bit more risk on one, where the other ones are maybe a little bit more easy to switch and to pivot. So, that would be my approach if we work together.
I love it. Adam, I asked all the guests on the podcast the same closing question, and that's, what is your favorite hotel?
Oh man, that is a really
You don't pick one.
I know. I've watched a few of yours, and I wasn't sure if it was the classic closing question. What is my favorite hotel? I don't have to pick one. If I don't have to pick one, I'm going to give you 3.
Give me
Chatham
3.
Chatham Bars in Cape Cod.
If you love hydrangeas, this is the hotel, right? I haven't been, but I have to go.
Yeah, my wife and I are kind of obsessed with that hotel. As a New Englander, it's kind of a thing. The Hotel Bel Air, and it's got to be another one. I know there's one. I'm just trying to narrow it down. I would say the Capella Sydney.
Wow. Love those. I don't think we've ever had those 3 before. So we're compiling this whole list of all these great hotels. So now we have 3 more to add. It's awesome.
No, I'm surprised no one said the Chatham Bars in the Bel Air, considering this is for the most part US based.
No, definitely not the Sydney one. Bel Air, maybe one, but definitely not Chatham Bars Inn. It's on my list too. So
yeah, love that place. And listen, congratulations again on your newest acquisition. White Barn's an incredible property.
Chatham Bars Inn, the inspiration in some ways to that.
Hey, maybe that's next on the list.
It could be. There's some other ones. So we might have to talk. This is not going to be the last time we're talking soon, I hope.
No, I hope not too. I think I should be down in South Florida in seemingly in the early part of January, it's looking like. So we have to set up time.
Hey everyone, it's Jake here. Thanks again for joining me on this conversation. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Lastly, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Wurzak. I'll see you in the next episode.
Jake Wurzak is the founder and CEO of Dove Hill Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Jake and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Dove Hill Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not reflect or represent real estate, financial, or investment advice.